Dr. Ruth J. Simmons. Today we thank you for continuing to break barriers for higher education minorities, but particularly for women of color. We welcome you back to your alma mater because you will forever be a Blue Devil.
I haven't been called a devil in a long time, but that's that's very nice. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I must say it's with considerable awe and pride that I stand before you this day as we continue to celebrate the 150th year of this exemplary institution. I think that awe is commensurate with what any graduate would feel returning to the place of their undergraduate education and finding that they have not brought shame to their institution. When I was here, Mr. President, many people thought I would bring shame to Dillard. And I feel so relieved coming back all these years and discovering that I just might not have done that. So rather than say I feel awe, maybe I should say I feel tremendous relief. You know, when I boarded that train for the first time in my life to make the journey from Houston to New Orleans, it was naturally with great trepidation. Never having left home before, not knowing anything about the wider world, and uncertain of my future prospects, I was just following the advice of a Dillard graduate, Mrs. Vernell Lilly, who had gone to Dillard and who counseled me to attend her alma mater. But I assure you I had no idea what would befall me here. But I knew one thing, and that is that she wanted only the best for me. So I was lucky that I got to Dillard and I met more educators who wanted only the best for me. I think often about what might have befallen me if I had not boarded that train. As a young girl, I was somewhat of a misfit among my peers. I was bookish and outspoken in the extreme, without the social skills that so many of my friends had. I was more comfortable alone with a book as a companion than I was with people. I know now that if I had attended any number of other colleges, that bookishness and outspoken nature would have either landed me in a corner or gotten me expelled from campus. But here's the thing. Dillard gave me room to grow up, which I definitely needed to do. Room to grow up, room to grow out, room to grow inwardly. To grow up away from my 11 brothers and sisters. To grow out from my shell and my insecurities about race and identity in this country. And more importantly, since my mother had died 2 years before, this university allowed me to grow inwardly as I struggled to understand her death, as well as my place in the world as a motherless child. In other words, this was the place that embraced me and gave me purpose. And by doing so, it prepared me for the challenging leadership roles that I have held over the past 30 years. So the greatest legacy of this 150-year-old university is that it has done that for thousands and thereby has helped to shape this country. What an awesome, awesome feat. You know, when I was at Dillard, as I said, I was a bit of a troublemaker. I don't know why now, as I think about it, I was so full of myself, but I know none of you are like that, right? But I came to Dillard feeling that I knew best, And so when my professors did not do what I thought was the proper job, I would tell them. When the university's policies did not fit my view of the world, I would rail against them. And here's the thing that landed me in trouble, where I was told, in fact, my family was told, that I could not graduate from Dillard, just on the eve of graduation. So you know how you always feel this idea that you might be pulled out of line your senior year because there's some glitch somehow? Well, the university wrote to my family and said I would not graduate because I failed to meet the chapel requirement. In those days, we were required to go to chapel. Now listen, I am the daughter of a Baptist minister, and so I don't have any trouble going to church, but doggone it, am I allowed to say that in the chat? Oh, yeah. But here's the 17-year-old mind, the way a 17-year-old mind works. But here's what I reasoned. But is it quite fair for every student to have to go to a Protestant service? Is that fair? I said to myself. What about Jews? What about Muslims? What about Catholics? It is unjust, and therefore I boycotted chapel. But you see, there were no Jews. There were at all. And so it was Pyrrhic, of course. But on the other hand, when my students today ask me, but Ruth, how on earth did you go from 5th Ward in Houston to lead an Ivy League university? I say to them, because I went to Dillard, a place that gave me the room to be stupid, to do stupid things, to find my voice, which I have never lost. That's what I said. And when I was president of Brown, and people were picking at me, of course, because they thought there must be some mistake, there must be some particular reason that I came from Dillard to be president of an Ivy League university. So they kept picking at me and wanting to know, well, what is the secret? The secret is a place that embraced me, that allowed me to become the person I needed to be, the place that taught me how to defend my ideas and to stick to them. And so to go from Dillard to Harvard and not be deterred by my professors at Harvard who put me down, that's what Dillard did for me. And subsequently, and all the way up through my career, the students say, but why weren't you discouraged by this? And why weren't you discouraged by that? And why weren't you discouraged by that? How did you keep at it? You will all know that secret when you graduate. And that is because you are here and because you understand your worth. And you understand that you will fight for that for the rest of your life. Yes, people will still, even in today's world, be challenging you and saying that your worth is different from what you know. So you will always have to fight for that, always. But you will be armed for that fight. And anybody who does that for you saves your life. Because the other thing my students say is, but after all that you've been through, why aren't you angry? Why do I need to be angry? Why? Why should I be angry? Because I reign, I rock, I rule. What is there to be angry about? So arm yourselves for that, because that's what you're going to need to do for the rest of your careers. And with all due respect to those who assert that business is all important to society, I rather believe that it is education and service that are the lifeblood of democracy, the engine of social and economic empowerment, and the most important source of community health and well-being. We celebrate all manner of accomplishments in this modern world. People who achieve a record number of triple doubles, those who walk across a canyon without a net, those whose looks earn them a magazine cover, reality stars, and on and on. But when do we celebrate the deliberate and intense efforts to develop young people who will excel at thinking, leading, and creative problem solving? That's what we should be celebrating. Educators. When do we acknowledge the selfless deeds that make life better for us? I promise you, Mr. President, I'm going to calm down. This is such a time to acknowledge the selfless deeds that make life better for all of us. For the story of Dillard is not just about buildings and oaks and ceremonies. It's about the accomplishments and deeds of all of the alumni that cling to this university and ratify its reason for being. It has been my great pleasure and honor to serve as a founding member of the council of that great new museum built on the Washington Mall, the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. As we watched that magnificent structure rise on the mall, right across from Washington Monument, we understood how seminal it was for this place to finally be able to tell our story, the full, unexpurgated story of African Americans in these United States, acknowledging that story so long after much of that history had occurred, unearthing stories of valor and victory that could for so long not be told, finding and exhibiting artifacts of the struggle to gain freedom and equality, and relating triumphant achievements in the face of brutality and bias. What a project that is. Now that the museum is in place, my attention turns to all the ways that we must continue to tell the story of what African Americans have experienced in the journey to full equality. The task of telling the complete story is as important at Dillard as it is on a national or global scale. And that story, carrying that forth, will rest with all of you. The recognition given to the founding of this special place and the milestone of 150 years is important to document, for inevitably future students will endeavor to understand the how and why of this and previous eras. They will need to feel, as I did, the import of that legacy and what it requires of them. Understanding the past is more than prologue to the future. It is a how-to manual for sustaining a relevant, vibrant, and purposeful future. Our struggle as a people on this continent is far from over. In the face of what is happening in the country right now, that struggle is still about calling out bigotry. It is still about standing up for the rights of all. It is still about speaking truth to power. It's about recapturing the country from the forces of darkness. It's about saving the lives of our children. It's about holding on to hope in the darkest hours. It's about building on the legacy of protest created for us by freedom fighters like Martin Luther King, Harriet Tubman, and a legion of ancestors who fought the good fight. Holding on to that legacy of hope and change is not the consequence of dispassion, disinterest, or modest effort, but of impassioned, intentional, and sustained attempts to mine the wellspring of knowledge and talent God has granted the human race. Hold on to that passion. I remember when the board of Brown came to me and asked me if I would consider becoming president of Brown. I said no. They said, well, you know, what's the problem? I said, because I think that you are making a serious mistake. Why is that? Because you obviously don't know me if you think that I should be your president. Hold on to your passion and your ideals, and don't let any job, don't let any lucre, don't let any peers steal that from you. And so I sat with him and I said, here's what you need to understand. I will never be the person you want me to be. I can only be the person that I am. I can only be the leader, exemplifying the path that I have traveled, the things that I care about. And so I challenged them to think hard about whether or not I was the right person for them, because I would not be stayed from my course. They agreed finally that they understood that, and they said, yes, they still wanted me to be president. They always think that until something comes up. And guess what came up? I decided to look into the slavery background of the university. That discomfort had to come, and people said it wasn't appropriate for an African American to raise that issue. I know, it's funny, isn't it? Who else has better standing to raise that issue than an African American? No one. So hope makes no concessions for adverse conditions, like people telling you you're crazy and saying that you better not do it because you're going to lose your job, or you better not do it because you're going to look foolish. Hope is not swayed, cowed, or diminished by bullying. Hope focuses on the future and in the essence of mankind's fearsome potential in myriad domains of human survival and achievement. I don't think we'll ever understand why our species has succeeded so well in exploiting the immense advantages of evolution, conquering the threat of extinction through the exploitation of extraordinary physical, social, and intellectual powers. But survived the human race has through successive periods of immense challenges while advancing ever more important social, technological, and scientific discoveries. And as a consequence of those advances, you are in a position today to do extraordinary things, much more extraordinary than anything you've seen come before you. Most would agree that although we are plagued by massive inequalities in the who benefits from the promise that lies ahead, as a species we stand on the brink of the most daring and important advances yet to be seen, as the breathtaking acceleration of scientific, technological, and medical discoveries dramatically improves the quality and longevity of life. My childhood dream, when I came to Dillard, was modest by today's standards. I aimed for no high position. I didn't think that was my path. I aimed for no wealth beyond the means to live comfortably. I aimed for no accolades for high achievement. Because you see, with my parents having an 8th grade education, to come to college was already a phenomenal achievement, and I was happy with that. And besides, accolades were foreign to my ilk in that horrid era of legal discrimination. I simply knew that I had to impose my own high standards for the totality of my life and my work, and work hard to meet them. Having had so many people sacrifice and die for my freedoms, how could I do less than lead an impassioned life that honored their sacrifice? That's what those 150 years should mean to you. You should do no less than lead that kind of life because of everything that was done to make it possible for you to sit where you sit today. Having suffered disparagement, disrespect, and contempt for all of their lives, my parents had a simpler dream for their children. Bless them. They wanted us to be honest, respectful, and decent human beings. This simple notion seems outdated in today's world, but it propelled me and my sisters and brothers. It fueled my interactions with others, and it informed my life choices. Honesty, decency, respect. Our country today is in the throes of one of the most uncivil periods in its history, where these notions are being tested and dismissed as political correctness. The demagoguery abroad in this land is exposing the frayed hopes of so many who believed that freedom and equality were finally at hand for every stratum and stripe, every gender, color, and religion, every ability and preference. As racial, religious, ethnic, and other tensions in our nation flare up, one can't help but be struck by the elegance of vision manifested by the civil rights struggle of the 60s. Envisioning a compassionate future in which we care for one another across a chasm of difference, Martin Luther King Jr. saw love as the ultimate solution for the divisions in our country. He saw compassion as not only the most effective salve for deep divisions, but also as a bridge to a more equitable reality in which socially constructed differences and narrow personal ambitions do not impede our common aims and opportunities. As an intellectual, he captured the importance of merging mind, body, and action. He thought, therefore he was. He was, therefore he cared. He cared, therefore he embraced the plight of others. In these and times to come, the legacy of the founders of this university and the way they made for generations of Dillardites cannot be just about a great house for you, a fancy car for you, or ample assets for you. It cannot be an entitlement to earn more than one's parents earn and to live better than others. It must be an aspiration to improve upon the benefits that we've all received from those who fought for our freedoms. By being equitable, by respecting difference, by speaking truth to power, by accepting the full burden of citizenship, by fighting hopelessness, we honor that legacy in an appropriate way. So wherever you go, whatever you do, be believers in and agents for justice, acting always on the belief that every human being, by God's grace, is born free. Dillard imbued in me the notion that I, too, am accountable for addressing the inequities that I see. It was here that I learned to speak up, to seek the truth, to nurture hope. So my thanks to this storied institution for the role it continues to play in renewing hope for thousands. Thank you, Dillard, for honoring our history. For to know that history is to understand the need to continue to protect and enlarge upon what our founders wrought. And by doing that, we will inevitably and unerringly renew efforts to do good and to seek justice. Thank you all for your role in keeping that spirit alive. And thank you for having me back.